"Get out of my restaurant. You don't belong here." Simone Ashford heard those words the way you hear a car alarm at 2 in the morning. Not immediately alarming, but impossible to ignore. She set down her water glass. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at the man who had said them and waited for him to realize what he had just done. He didn't. Not yet. The dining room of Aurelius was everything its reputation promised. Low amber lighting that turned ordinary faces golden. White linen tablecloths pressed so crisply they looked like folded silence. A single orchid on each table, pale and improbable. The kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices, not because the food was cheap, but because asking the cost was considered a kind of vulgarity. Simone Ashford, 41, founder and CEO of Clearwater Analytics, had built a company that processed risk data for 60% of the country's top financial institutions. Her software lived inside systems that moved billions of dollars across continents before most people had finished their morning coffee. She had been featured on the cover of 2 financial magazines. She had been invited to speak before a Senate subcommittee on algorithmic transparency. She had sat across from presidents of things, countries, banks, universities. She was also wearing a grey cardigan, dark jeans, and flat shoes. Her natural hair was pulled back in a loose twist. Her bag was canvas, not leather. The watch on her wrist was small and second-hand, bought for $12 at a flea market in Nashville when she was 23 and had nothing but ambition and a laptop with a cracked screen. She had kept it because it still worked. That was the only detail the maitre had time to register before he decided she did not belong. His name was Philip Crane, 48, and he had managed the front of house at Aurelius for 11 years. He was thin and precise, with silver-framed glasses, and the particular kind of posture that comes from believing one's job is a form of guardianship. He guarded this dining room the way some people guard ideas. Not the room itself, but the version of it he needed it to remain. Simone had arrived at 7:15. She had a 7:30 reservation. The hostess, a young woman named Brianna who had barely looked up from the screen, had seated her at table 9 without incident. Table 9 was near the back, beside the waitstaff corridor, with a partial view of the kitchen door. It was where Aurelius placed guests it wasn't sure about. Simone had noticed. She always noticed, but she had sat down and opened the menu because she was here to meet someone, and making a point about a table could wait. The someone was Daniel Rhee, 55, founder of Rhee Capital Group, one of the most quietly powerful private equity firms on the East Coast. Daniel was not a man who advertised himself. He did not need to. The dinner tonight was the final step in a conversation that had been building for 4 months. If it went well, Rhee Capital would become the largest single investor in Clearwater Analytics' expansion into European markets. It was, in quiet terms, a $200 million dinner. Simone had told her assistant Mara not to mention the number. It had a way of making rooms feel different when people knew it was in them. She was reading the wine list when Philip Crane appeared at her elbow. "Excuse me," he said, not quite looking at her. "Are you waiting for someone?" "I have a reservation," Simone said. 7:30. Ashford. Philip's eyes moved to the reservation book in his hand, then away from it too quickly. He said, as if the word itself was inconclusive. "Is there a problem with the booking?" Simone asked. "Not at all," Philip said. "I just want to make sure you're in the right place." Simone looked at the orchid on the table. She looked at the pressed linen. She looked at Philip's silver glasses catching the amber light. "I believe I am," she said. Philip's mouth tightened at one corner. "Of course. However, table 9 is actually reserved this evening for a private event. I'll need to ask you to wait at the bar while we sort out the arrangement." Simone placed the menu flat on the table. "My reservation is confirmed. I received an email this morning." "Systems make errors," Philip said. "Then show me the error," Simone replied. That was when the restaurant manager appeared. His name was Carter Blaine, 52, and he had been with Aurelius since its second year. Carter was broad through the shoulders with dark hair silvering at the temples and the practiced ease of a man accustomed to handling situations before they required witnesses. He wore his authority like a second jacket. Carter stopped beside Philip and took in the table. The canvas bag, the cardigan, the second-hand watch, in the same half-second that Philip had. The assessment happened so fast neither of them knew they'd made it. That was the thing about learned bias. It operated below the threshold of intention. "Good evening," Carter said, his voice pleasant in the way of all practiced restaurant voices. "I understand there may be a mix-up with your seating." "There's no mix-up on my end," Simone said. Carter smiled, and the smile did not move past his lips. "We have a waiting area at the bar that's quite comfortable. Once we confirm the reservation." "It's already confirmed," Simone said. "Ashford." 7:30, I have the confirmation on my phone. Carter's eyes flicked to the phone she placed on the table. He looked at the confirmation email for exactly as long as it took to decide it didn't change anything. "I understand," he said, in the tone people use when they have no intention of understanding. "However, for the comfort of all our guests, I'm going to ask that you wait." "No," Simone said. The word fell clean and quiet into the ambient sound of the dining room. A woman at the next table glanced over her menu. A man near the window looked up from his wine. Carter's smile held, barely. "I beg your pardon?" I said no. Simone's hands were folded on the table. Her voice had not changed pitch or speed. "I have a valid reservation, a confirmed table, and a dinner companion arriving in 12 minutes. I'm not going to the bar." Carter leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, I really must insist." "On what grounds?" Simone asked. "My reservation is valid. My behavior is appropriate. My clothing violates no stated dress code. I checked before arriving. So I would like to understand, specifically, what grounds you're using." Carter blinked. He had not expected that sentence. Most guests, when pressed with authority and decorum and the subtle suggestion that their presence was inconvenient, moved. They apologized. They made themselves smaller. That was what the voice was designed to produce. Simone had heard that voice in conference rooms and hotel lobbies and professional spaces for 2 decades. She had catalogued its rhythms. "We have a responsibility to all our guests," Carter said. "And I am one of them," Simone replied. From a corner table near the front, a woman of about 70 watched this exchange with still, attentive eyes. Her name was Edna Park, and she had been dining at Aurelius for over 20 years. She said nothing yet. But she set down her fork. Philip had drifted back toward the host stand, watching. His face held the specific blankness of a person waiting for the problem to solve itself before he had to acknowledge it was a problem. Carter tried once more. His voice softened, as if kindness were a different kind of pressure. "We simply want to ensure the best experience for everyone this evening." "Then let me have dinner," Simone said. Carter's patience cracked at the edge. Not loudly. Nothing in Aurelius was loud, but it cracked. He straightened. "If you continue to refuse..." "Refuse what?" Simone asked. "You're asking me to leave a table I paid to sit at. That is not a request I'm going to honor. Get out of my restaurant," Carter said. "You don't belong here." The sentence dropped into the room and did not bounce. It sank. A man 2 tables over stopped cutting his steak. Brianna, the hostess, went very still behind the podium. The woman near the window set her glass down without drinking. Simone looked at Carter Blaine for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. She did not do it quickly. She did not do it dramatically. She scrolled to a contact labeled Daniel Rhee, dinner, and typed 4 words. "Running slightly late." Daniel replied within seconds. "Pulling up now." 2 minutes. Simone placed the phone face down and looked back at Carter. "You should know," she said, "that the person I'm meeting is arriving momentarily, and I'd like you to be standing exactly where you are when he does." Carter squared his shoulders. "Ma'am, this is your final opportunity." "I know," Simone said. It's yours too. She said it the way you close a door, not slamming, just final. Carter stood there, filling his posture with the only certainty he had left, which was that he was the manager of this restaurant, and she was a woman in a cardigan who had refused to be moved, to be illaed. In 11 years of managing dining rooms, he had never been outfaced by someone who hadn't raised their voice. He searched her expression for fear or uncertainty or the trembling edge of someone about to fold. He found none of it. Simone Ashford was 41 years old. She had walked into rooms that did not want her since she was 26. She had sat at tables where the person across from her looked past her shoulder for someone more obviously important. She had presented to rooms where people's first reaction, before she had spoken a single word, was the quiet recalibration of expectation. Surprise, poorly disguised, that she was the one. She had spent years learning when to absorb it and when to name it. Tonight, she had chosen to name it, not because she was angry. She was not angry. She was something harder to manage than angry. She was certain. Behind that certainty lived a memory she rarely visited. She was 28, presenting her first major proposal to a room of investors in Houston. A man at the head of the table had said, while she was still setting up her slides, that they should wait for the lead analyst to arrive. He meant her. He did not believe she was her. She had smiled, introduced herself again, and given the best presentation of her early career. They had not invested. She had never been entirely sure whether it was the idea or the introduction that had cost her. She had promised herself she would never again make someone's disbelief easier to maintain by staying quiet. The restaurant door opened. Daniel Rhee, 55, walked in with the unhurried movement of a man who had been powerful long enough that he no longer needed to signal it. He wore a simple navy jacket, no tie. His hair was neat. His eyes moved across the room with the efficiency of someone who processed environments quickly. He spotted Simone at table 9 and moved toward her. Then he noticed Carter Blaine, still standing over the table like a man waiting for a verdict. He noticed the rigid line of Carter's shoulders. He noticed the quality of the silence around this particular corner of the room. Daniel Rhee had not built a $2 billion firm by missing the temperature of a room. "Simone," he said, "I hope I haven't kept you." "Not at all," she said. The manager was just discussing the seating arrangement. Daniel looked at Carter. The look was brief and total. "Is there a problem with the table?" Carter opened his mouth. In his 11 years, he had navigated complaints from senators and surgeons, and once, memorably, a head of state. He had managed those situations with the kind of professional agility that made his reputation. But the way Daniel Rhee was looking at him, not with anger, not with threat, simply with the uncomplicated attention of a man who wanted an answer, pressed something mechanical in his confidence until it slipped. "No," Carter said. The word came out smaller than he intended. "Good," Daniel said, and sat down. Philip watched from the host stand. His face had developed a careful neutrality, the kind people use when they are trying to determine how far a wave will travel before it reaches them. At the corner table, Edna Park picked her fork back up, but she was still watching. Carter excused himself with a murmur so low it didn't resolve into language. He retreated to the back corridor and exhaled against the wall. Simone waited until he was gone, then looked at Daniel across the orchid. "Thank you for being on time," she said. "Always," he said. And then, because he was perceptive and did not pretend otherwise, "Do you want to tell me what just happened?" "Not yet," she said. "Let's eat first." But Simone had not put her phone away. After the server, a young man named Eli, who arrived with appropriate speed and none of the preceding tension, took their drink orders, she typed a message to Mara. "I need the reservation confirmation time-stamped, and the name of the GM above Carter Blaine at Aurelius. Tonight." Mara responded in under a minute. "On it." Simone set the phone on the table. Face up, she had not hidden it. She did not intend to. The dinner was excellent. in the way that meals are excellent when they are not the real reason for the room. The food was precise and unhurried. The conversation moved across Q4 projections and European regulatory environments and the specific culture of risk that Recapital carried into every investment. Daniel was sharp in the way Simone respected most. He asked questions instead of making statements, and he listened to the answers. Halfway through the main course, the couple at the adjacent table departed. As the woman passed, her name was Lena Sorensen, and she was 64, and she had been quietly witness to the exchange at table 9 since she arrived. She stopped beside Simone's chair. "I want you to know," Lena said, quietly enough that only Simone and Daniel could hear. "I saw what happened earlier, what that man said to you." Simone looked up at her. "Thank you. I should have said something sooner." Lena's hands tightened slightly around her clutch. "I didn't. I'm sorry for that." "You said it now," Simone replied. Lena nodded once and walked out. Simone watched her go and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not vindication, something quieter, the specific relief of being seen by someone who did not have to look. At the corner table, Edna Park signaled her server. She asked for the check. Then, before her server left, she asked for the name of the restaurant's general manager and the parent group's main contact number. The server looked uncertain. Edna looked at him with the clear-eyed patience of a woman who had been waiting politely in rooms for 70 years and knew exactly which requests were reasonable. He wrote the information down. When dessert arrived, small, geometric, precise, Daniel set down his spoon and looked at Simone directly. "I've been in business long enough to recognize when someone is managing something they haven't mentioned," he said. "And you've been managing something since I walked in." Simone considered him. Daniel Rhee did not say things he didn't mean. That was why she had wanted this partnership. "The manager asked me to leave before you arrived," she said. "He told me I didn't belong here." Daniel's expression did not shift dramatically. That was the thing about people who had spent decades in rooms where the temperature changed fast. They did not flinch at heat, but something behind his eyes tightened. He said that, in those exact words. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "And you stayed." "And I stayed," Simone said. "Good," he said. "Because I would have left with you if you hadn't." Simone looked at him. "I've been building things for 30 years, Daniel continued. "I have never once completed a successful partnership with an institution that didn't know its own values. What happened here tonight is information." He paused. "It's information about this restaurant, but it's also information about you." Simone waited. "You didn't raise your voice," he said. "You didn't perform. You simply refused to be wrong about yourself." He set the spoon down again, the dessert untouched. "That is exactly the disposition I want managing the capital I put into something." It was as close to a formal statement of commitment as Daniel Rhee ever made before the paperwork. Simone said, "We should probably discuss terms." "We probably should," he agreed. The dinner ended at 9:40. Eli cleared the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had felt the undertow of the evening and was grateful it had resolved itself above the surface. Simone signed the check. She had insisted, and Daniel had let her, because he understood it was not about the check. And they walked out together through the amber light and the pressed linen and the orchids. Carter Blaine did not emerge from the back corridor. Philip Crane watched them leave from the host's stand with the fixed expression of someone who had spent 2 hours trying to decide how much he had witnessed. At the corner table, Edna Park was already gone. What happened next did not happen loudly, because the things that dismantle institutions rarely do. Mara had, by 9:15, identified that Aurelius was owned by the Halcyon Hospitality Group, whose chief operations officer was a woman named Susan Merritt. By 9:50, she had drafted a formal incident report at Simone's direction. Not for the press, not for social media, just for Susan Merritt's office. with the time-stamped reservation confirmation, the specific language Carter Blaine had used, and 3 names: Brianna, who had observed the initial interaction; Eli, who had arrived as it concluded; and Lena Sorensen, whose card Simone had taken as she passed. The report was precise. It named behaviors, not characters. It asked for 3 things: an acknowledgement of the incident, a review of host protocols across Halcyon properties, and a written statement of non-retaliation for any staff who provided testimony. It did not ask for an apology. Simone had learned, over time, that apologies from institutions were the same as corrections from newspapers. They were printed in smaller type than the original and read by fewer people. What mattered was what changed in the practice, not what was said about the practice. Susan Merritt received the report at 7:10 the following morning. She read it twice. Then she called her deputy and said, with very little ceremony, that she needed the incident timeline on her desk within the hour. The timestamp on the reservation confirmation showed that Simone Ashford had confirmed the table at 11:42 that morning. The system showed the table had been rebooked manually from Philip Crane's login at 2:17 that afternoon. Susan Merritt stared at that detail for a long time. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to Aurelius. The second was to Halcyon's legal counsel. The third was to the number at the bottom of Simone's report, which was Clearwater Analytica's main line. Mara transferred the call. "Mrs. Ashford," Susan Merritt said, "I'm calling because what you described is not a systems error and not a miscommunication. I've seen the reservation log. I understand what happened." Simone said, "Good. I didn't think it was complicated." "I want to be direct with you," Susan said. "Carter Blaine has been with our group for 9 years. Philip Crane for 11. I am not in a position to tell you what discipline will look like before our process completes, but I will tell you that the record shows what it shows, and the record will not be amended." Simone was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. "What I want to know is what happens who doesn't have a documented reservation, who hasn't done everything right on paper. Does she have to prove something that a different guest would never be asked to prove?" Susan Merritt was silent. "That's the question your review needs to answer," Simone said. "Not just what Carter Blaine said, what made him think he could say it." The silence, on the other end, lasted long enough to mean something. "We'll commission an independent review of hospitality protocols across Halcyon properties," Susan finally said. "I want to be clear. This is not a statement we're making for publicity. This is an operational decision." "I understand," Simone said. "Send the written commitment to my office, and I'd like the review to be conducted by a firm with no prior relationship to Halcyon." "I can agree to that. Then I'll wait for the paperwork." The call ended. Mara appeared in the doorway of Simone's office. "How did it go, like most things?" Simone said. "Better than it should have needed to." Mara looked at her carefully. She had worked with Simone for 6 years. She knew the particular flatness that appeared in Simone's voice after she had handled something that should not have required handling. "Are you okay?" Mara asked. Simone considered the question, not the polite version of it. She knew Mara was not asking politely. "I'm fine," she said. Then, because Mara deserved the fuller answer, "I think about the person who was there before me. Last Wednesday, Thursday, whoever sat down at table 9 and got Carter Blaine standing over them with that voice, and didn't have a time-stamped reservation, or a dinner companion arriving in 12 minutes who happened to be Daniel Rhee." She paused. "What happened to that person?" Mara had no answer. There wasn't one, not yet. "That's the part that matters," Simone said. "Not me. I'm fine. The system that made him confident enough to say it out loud. That's what needs to be uncomfortable." 3 weeks later, Halcyon Hospitality Group issued a written statement confirming an operational review across 14 of its properties, conducted by an outside firm. The statement made no specific reference to Aurelius or to any individual incident. It spoke about a commitment to consistent standards and equitable service. It was the kind of statement organizations issue when they have been shown the gap between who they believe they are and who they actually have been. The independent review, and Simone had made certain the review firm had no prior relationship with Halcyon, had pushed back when the first proposed firm had a consulting history with 2 Halcyon properties, found that Table 9 at Aurelius had a documented pattern. Guests who had been seated there without requesting it skewed toward a particular profile. The system itself had not made that assignment. The humans interpreting the system had. That finding did not make the newspaper. Simone had not sent it to the newspaper. She had sent it to Susan Merritt, to Halcyon's legal team, and to the operations director overseeing host training. She had learned, early in her career, that public pressure moved faster, but structural change moved deeper. She was not interested in being the face of the story. She was interested in the story not happening again. Daniel Rhee called on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after dinner. The Clearwater Analytics Rhee Capital Partnership documents were in final legal review. "I've been following the Halcyon situation," he said. Not a question. "Quietly," Simone said. "That seems to be your preferred register," he replied. "Loudness is for people who need to be heard by the room." Simone said, "I'm more interested in the room changing." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "When I was 32, he said, I went to a closing dinner at a restaurant in Manhattan. Business dinner, 3rd deal of my career. The maitre d' tried to redirect me to the bar before my clients arrived." He paused. "I waited, the clients arrived. The deal closed. I never went back to that restaurant." Simone said, "Did it change anything?" "No," he said, "because I didn't ask it to. I just left." A pause. "You asked it to." "Someone had to be in a position to," Simone said. "I was." There was a quality to the silence after that which neither of them worked to fill, because some things resolve more completely in the quiet. "The paperwork goes to signatures tomorrow," Daniel said finally. "I'll have our legal team ready," Simone said. She set the phone down and turned to face the window of her office. 22 floors up, the city moved below in its ordinary morning patterns. Cabs and foot traffic and the slow percussion of a place that did not stop to consider itself. She thought about the watch on her wrist. $12 at a flea market in Nashville, 2006. A vendor who had looked at the young woman with no money and a laptop bag that was more duct tape than nylon, and had said the watch was $8. Because it still had some life left in it. She had tried to give him 12. He had tried to give her change. She had told him to keep it. She still wore the watch because it still worked, and because some things you carried not to prove where you had been, but to remember that where you began was not a limitation. It was a foundation. Somewhere across the city, in a Halcyon Hospitality Group training session being developed by an outside firm, a revised host protocols module was being written. It would address the gap between stated standards and applied judgment. It would include language about equitable seating assignment. It would be implemented, in some form, across 14 properties. It would not be perfect. Institutional change rarely arrived perfect, but it would be different from what had come before and different. Slower than anyone wanted, quieter than justice deserved, was still the direction of repair. Simone turned back to her desk. She had a 9 o'clock call, a board update at 11, and a signed partnership agreement to review before end of day. The kind of morning that looked, from the outside, like any other morning. She opened her laptop and got to work.